Let's have a broader conversation now. Carrie Severino is the Chief Counsel and Policy Director at Judicial Crisis Network. It's a group who opposes Judge Merrick Garland's nomination. And joining me momentarily, Gloria Brown-Marshall, constitutional law professor. She will join us in just a second. But Carrie, to you first. You just heard Evan sort of go through Merrick Garland's accolades and his thorough resume. But why don't you think he is the appropriate nominee?
Well, as Leader McConnell stated it, I think the fundamental issue is this is an unusual opportunity for the American people to have their voice heard on who will nominate the next justice, and that's why the Senate ultimately is holding this seat open. Nominating Judge Garland doesn't really change that. He's a reliable liberal vote. That's why the president nominated him. The New York Times said his presence in the court would make it the most liberal court in 50 years. That's not a surprise, especially when we look at his decisions on things like the Second Amendment, which he's hostile to, on deference to administrative agencies like the EPA, like the IRS, like the NLRB, kind of opening the door for more bureaucratic control of the government. I think those are all the sorts of things people are going to be concerned about because the president, at the end of the day, really just wants to cement a fifth solid liberal vote in the Supreme Court, and Judge Garland would do that.
So I hear you saying he would be a liberal vote, despite the fact that we, hear from President Obama that he considers him truly a consensus candidate. Let me also point out Garland, back in 1997, was confirmed by the support of 7 sitting Republicans, including the former chairman of the Judiciary Committee, Senator Orrin Hatch. This was Senator Hatch some years ago.
Based solely on his qualifications, I support the nomination of Mr. Garland, and I encourage my colleagues to do the same. To my knowledge, no one, absolutely no one, disputes the following. Merrick Garland is highly qualified to sit on the D.C. Circuit. His intelligence and his scholarship cannot be questioned.
So how would you refute that?
Well, look, Judge Bork was affirmed to the D.C. Circuit by a voice vote. Justice Thomas, same thing, a voice vote, including members who later went on to viciously attack both of those D.C. Circuit judges when they were appointed to the Supreme Court. And as we know, we got a verb out of it. We got the word borking to describe that kind of hostile attack to a judicial nomination process. I think there's a very different role at the Supreme Court. You don't have to follow precedent. You have a much more open ability to interpret the Constitution how you see fit, not simply how the Supreme Court has said before. And I think that's the reason it's a totally different ball game when you're looking at a Supreme Court nomination.
But what about, though, the risks for Republicans to draw this line in the sand, especially when you think about, vulnerable Senate Republicans who would be up for re-election and voters saying, well, why the heck wouldn't you give this person who seems extraordinarily qualified a chance? How would you respond to that?
There's much more risk for them to move ahead with it. The reason we have a Republican Senate now is because the American people were fed up with President Obama's unconstitutional and aggressive executive actions. Pushing back on that is why they elected a Republican Senate, and they're doing their job now by making sure that people have an opportunity to weigh in on this important issue. I think there's a lot of red state Democrats who have to be worried, especially when you look at his record on things like guns and on things like deferring to the EPA. Those are things that aren't going to play really well in some of those red states. I don't think people want even their Democratic senators to just be a rubber stamp for this president's nomination.
Okay, Carrie, thank you.